Michael Jackson hadn't smiled for 127 days. The king of pop sat alone in his $17 million Neverland Ranch, staring at his reflection in the mirrored walls of his dance studio, when a 9-year-old girl with no hair asked him the question that changed everything. Why are you sad when you have magic? It was November 15, 1995, and Michael Jackson was drowning. Not in water, but in a darkness that had consumed him since the release of his History album earlier that year. The media attacks had been relentless. The allegations, the investigations, the constant scrutiny of every move he made had left him a shell of the vibrant performer the world knew and loved. The numbers told the story of his isolation: 127 days without a genuine smile, 89 days since he had last entered his recording studio, 45 days since he had spoken to anyone outside his immediate staff, and 12 days since he had eaten a full meal. His personal chef, Mrs. Rodriguez, left trays outside his bedroom door that often returned untouched. Michael had built Neverland Ranch as his escape from the adult world that had stolen his childhood, but lately even his magical kingdom felt like a prison. The amusement park rides sat silent, their colorful paint fading in the California sun. The carousel horses that once brought him such joy now seemed to mock him with their frozen smiles. The zoo animals seemed to sense his melancholy. Even Louis, his favorite llama, had stopped approaching the fence when Michael walked by. The staff whispered concerns about their employer, who had retreated into complete isolation. Housekeepers found notebooks filled with dark poetry scattered around his rooms. Security guards reported that he wandered the property at 3 a.m., sometimes talking to himself, sometimes just standing motionless for hours. His personal assistant had started screening all phone calls, turning away concerned friends and family members who were desperate to reach him. The weight of fame, which had once lifted him to incredible heights, now felt like it was crushing him into the ground. Every morning, Michael would wake up hoping the darkness had lifted, but each day brought the same suffocating feeling of being trapped in a life that no longer felt like his own. He spent most days in his bedroom, emerging only for brief walks around the property or to sit at his piano, where no music came. The man who had given the world Thriller, Billie Jean, and Beat It couldn't even remember why he had ever wanted to sing. Meanwhile, 900 miles north in Portland, Oregon, a battle was being fought in the pediatric oncology ward of Dernbecker Children's Hospital. 9-year-old Sophie Miller was losing her fight with acute lymphoblastic leukemia, but you wouldn't know it from the smile that rarely left her face. Sophie had been diagnosed 8 months earlier, just 2 weeks after her 9th birthday party, a party where she had performed her own version of the moonwalk for her classmates in the Miller family's backyard. The blonde, energetic girl who had spent her days dancing around their modest home in southeast Portland suddenly found herself connected to IV tubes and facing a reality no child should ever have to understand. The transition had been brutal for the entire Miller family. Jennifer Miller, a third-grade teacher at nearby Woodstock Elementary, had taken an indefinite leave of absence to be with her daughter Robert Miller, who had served the Portland Fire Department for 15 years. Found himself breaking down in his truck between emergency calls, unable to reconcile his ability to save strangers with his powerlessness to save his own child. Sophie's hospital room on the 7th floor had become legendary among the nursing staff. What started as a sterile medical space had been transformed into a shrine of hope and music. Colorful Michael Jackson posters covered every available wall space, some professionally printed, others hand-drawn by Sophie herself during her stronger days. A small boombox sat on her nightstand, cycling through the same collection of Michael Jackson CDs that played softly throughout the day. The other children in the cancer ward had begun referring to Sophie's room as the music room. During group therapy sessions, Sophie would wheel her IV pole down the hallway, gathering other young patients for impromptu dance sessions. Even the children too weak to move would tap their fingers to the rhythm of "Don't Stop Till You Get Enough," or mouth the words to "The Way You Make Me Feel." Dr. Patricia Anderson, the chief pediatric oncologist, had witnessed thousands of children fight cancer over her 20-year career, but she had never seen anything quite like Sophie's effect on the entire ward. She turned that floor into something magical, Dr. Anderson would later recall. Other children started responding better to treatment when Sophie was around. We had nurses requesting extra shifts on the 7th floor just to be part of whatever was happening there. She never stopped being Sophie. Her mother, Jennifer Miller, would later say, even when she lost her beautiful hair, even when the treatments made her so weak she could barely lift her head, she would still ask the nurses to play Michael Jackson songs during her chemotherapy sessions. Sophie's love affair with Michael Jackson had begun 3 years earlier, when her father, Robert, a Portland firefighter, had shown her a VHS tape of Michael's performances from the 1980s. The little girl was mesmerized by his moves, his voice, and what she called his happy magic. "Daddy, he makes people smile even when they're sad," Sophie had said, trying to moonwalk across their living room floor in her sock feet. From that moment, Sophie's hospital room became a shrine to the King of Pop posters covered the walls, and she owned every album, every VHS tape, and even learned to sign the words to heal the world for other children in the cancer ward who couldn't hear. When the Make-A-Wish Foundation approached the Miller family in October 1995, Sophie's request was immediate and unwavering. She wanted to meet Michael Jackson. The volunteer coordinator, Maria Santos, had handled hundreds of celebrity meeting requests over her 5 years with the foundation, but Sophie's determination was unlike anything she had encountered. While most children were shy about articulating their wishes, Sophie had prepared a detailed explanation for why this meeting was so important to her. "I want to ask him something important," she told Maria, her blue eyes serious beneath the colorful headscarf that had replaced her lost hair. "I need to know his secret. How does he make music that helps people when they're sad? Because I think maybe he's sad too sometimes, and I want to tell him it's okay." The foundation had granted thousands of wishes involving celebrities, but Michael Jackson requests were notoriously difficult. The star had been increasingly reclusive since the accusations and media scrutiny of recent years, and his representatives typically declined most meeting requests with polite but firm rejections. Maria had to be honest with the Miller family about the challenges they faced. "Michael Jackson wishes are some of the hardest to arrange," she explained to Jennifer and Robert. "We've had very few successes in recent years. Are there any other wishes Sophie might consider?" But Sophie was adamant. She had already written a letter to Michael Jackson in her careful 9-year-old handwriting, explaining why she needed to meet him. The letter, which Maria included in her formal request to Michael's management team, was unlike any celebrity request letter the foundation had ever sent. "Dear Mr. Michael Jackson," it read, "my name is Sophie Miller, and I am 9 years old. I am very sick with cancer, but I am not scared because your music makes me brave. I listen to Heal the World every night before I fall asleep, and it makes me remember that there are good people in the world. I would like to meet you not to ask for autographs or take pictures, but to ask you how you stay so good when the world is sometimes mean to you. My mom says you must have a very big heart to make such beautiful music. I would like to see your heart and maybe share mine with you too, love. Sophie Miller." But something about Sophie's story, perhaps the urgency of her condition, the pure innocence of her request, or the unusual nature of her letter, somehow reached the right people at the right time. On November 10th, Michael's assistant received a call that would change everything. "Mr. Jackson," she said softly, approaching him as he sat motionless on his bedroom balcony, staring out at his empty kingdom. "There's a little girl who wants to meet you." Michael didn't look up. He had been avoiding most human contact for months, and the thought of performing happiness for a stranger, even a sick child, felt impossible. "I can't," he whispered. "I don't have anything to give right now." "Sir, she's very sick. The doctors say she might not have much time left. She specifically asked for you." Michael finally turned, and his assistant saw something she hadn't seen in months, a flicker of the man who had once dedicated his life to making children happy. "What's her name?" he asked quietly. "Sophie Miller. She's 9 years old and she has leukemia. She wants to ask you something important." That night, Michael called his mother, Katherine Jackson, something he rarely did anymore during his darkest period. "Mama, there's a little girl who wants to see me," he said, his voice cracking. "But I don't know if I can do it. I don't feel like Michael Jackson anymore. How can I disappoint a dying child by showing her this broken version of me? Catherine's voice was firm but gentle. Michael, baby. Maybe she's not coming to see Michael Jackson, the superstar. Maybe she's coming to see Michael Jackson, the person. Sometimes that's exactly what we need to remember who we really are. On November 15th, a private medical transport arrived at Neverland Ranch, carrying the Miller family and their precious cargo. Sophie had insisted on wearing her favorite Michael Jackson t-shirt, the one from the black or white music video, and she clutched a small wrapped gift in her thin hands. Michael watched from his bedroom window as the van pulled up to the main house. His heart pounded as he saw a small figure in a wheelchair being lifted out of the vehicle. For the first time in months, he felt something other than numbness. He felt fear, not stage fright or performance anxiety, but the deep fear of disappointing someone who needed him to be something he wasn't sure he could be anymore. Taking a deep breath, Michael walked slowly down the grand staircase of his home. At the bottom, waiting in his living room, sat the smallest, thinnest little girl he had ever seen. But when their eyes met, Sophie's face exploded into a smile so radiant it actually made Michael take a step backward. "You're really him," Sophie whispered, her voice weak but filled with pure joy. "You're really Michael Jackson." Michael knelt down to her eye level, and for the first time in 127 days he felt his mouth turn up at the corners. It wasn't a full smile yet, but it was something. "Hi, Sophie," he said softly. "I heard you wanted to meet me." "I've been waiting my whole life for this," Sophie replied with the sincerity that only children possess. "Well, maybe not my whole life because I'm only 9, but it feels like my whole life." Despite himself, Michael chuckled. It was the first sound of laughter that had escaped his lips in months. "Would you like to see Neverland?" Michael asked, gesturing toward the grounds beyond the living room windows. Sophie's eyes grew wide. "Can we really? Can we go on the rides? Can I meet Bubbles?" Michael's heart sank a little. Bubbles, his famous chimpanzee, had been moved to a sanctuary years ago, and most of the amusement park had been shut down during his period of isolation. But looking at Sophie's expectant face, he knew he had to find a way to create magic, even if he didn't feel magical anymore. "Let me show you around," Michael said, standing and gently pushing Sophie's wheelchair toward the door. They spent the first hour touring the property in relative silence. Michael pointed out various attractions and buildings, but his commentary was flat, mechanical. Sophie seemed to sense his detachment and grew quieter as they moved from place to place. When they reached the carousel, Michael stopped and sat down on a bench nearby, feeling defeated. This wasn't going the way he had hoped. Sophie deserved better than this hollow version of himself. Sophie studied Michael's profile for a long moment, then wheeled her chair closer to his bench. "Mr. Michael," she said quietly, "can I ask you my important question now?" Michael nodded, bracing himself for a request he might not be able to fulfill. Sophie looked directly into his eyes with the kind of unflinching honesty that only children and the dying possess. "Why are you sad when you have magic?" The question hit Michael like a physical blow. He opened his mouth to give some adult response, some deflection or explanation, but no words came. "What do you mean, Sophie?" he finally managed to ask. "The magic," Sophie said, her voice getting stronger with excitement. "The music magic. When you sing, people all over the world smile. When you dance, people forget their problems. When you make your music videos, people dream about being happy. That's the most powerful magic in the whole world." Michael stared at this tiny girl in disbelief. "But Sophie, magic isn't real. I'm just a person who sings and dances. Sometimes people don't like what I do, and sometimes—" "No," Sophie interrupted with surprising force. "That's not true. Magic is real because I've seen it. When my mom plays Man in the Mirror in my hospital room, my dad stops crying. When the nurses put on Beat It, the other sick kids start dancing in their wheelchairs. When I listen to Heal the World, I remember that being sick doesn't mean I can't still love people." She paused, catching her breath, then continued with passionate intensity. "You made all that happen with your music. If that's not magic, then magic doesn't exist." Michael felt something crack open inside his chest. Not breaking, but opening. For months, he had been focused on everything that was wrong with his life, everything he had lost, everything that had been taken from him. But here was this dying child showing him everything he had given to the world. "Sophie," Michael said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I haven't felt magical in a very long time." "Well then," Sophie said matter-of-factly, "we need to find it again. My dad says that when you lose something important, you have to look in the last place you remember having it. Where did you last remember feeling magical?" Michael thought for a moment, then stood up suddenly. "Follow me." He pushed Sophie's wheelchair toward a building she hadn't seen yet, his personal recording studio. Inside, the walls were covered with gold and platinum records, and in the center sat a baby grand piano surrounded by state-of-the-art recording equipment. "This is where I make music," Michael said, sitting down at the piano bench. "Will you play something?" Sophie asked hopefully. Michael's hands hovered over the keys. He hadn't touched the piano in weeks, but something about Sophie's presence made him feel brave enough to try. He began playing the opening notes to Heal the World, slowly and quietly at first, then with growing confidence. As the melody filled the room, Sophie closed her eyes and began to sway in her wheelchair, a peaceful smile spreading across her face. "See?" she whispered without opening her eyes. "Magic." For the first time in 127 days, Michael Jackson smiled. Really smiled. They spent the next 3 hours in the studio together. Michael played every song Sophie requested, and she sang along in her sweet, thin voice. When she asked if she could hear something new, Michael found himself improvising, creating melodies that seemed to flow from some deep well he had thought had run dry. "What's that one called?" Sophie asked after Michael finished playing a particularly beautiful piece. "I don't know," Michael admitted. "I just made it up." "It sounds like hope," Sophie said. "You should call it Sophie's Hope." As the afternoon wore on, something remarkable happened. Michael began to remember why he had fallen in love with music in the first place. It wasn't about the fame or the money or the critical acclaim. It was about connection, about touching another human being's heart and making them feel less alone in the world. When it was time for Sophie to return to the hospital, she handed Michael the small wrapped gift she had been clutching all day. "This is for you," she said. "I made it myself before I got too sick." Inside the package was a hand-drawn picture of Michael performing on stage, surrounded by thousands of stick figures with smiling faces. At the bottom, in careful 9-year-old handwriting, Sophie had written, "Thank you for sharing your magic with the world. Love, Sophie Miller." "Sophie," Michael said, kneeling down one last time to hug her carefully. "You gave me back something I thought I had lost forever." "The magic was always there, Mr. Michael," Sophie replied. "Sometimes we just forget to look for it. Promise me you'll keep looking?" "I promise," Michael whispered, tears streaming down his face. 3 weeks later, Sophie Miller passed away peacefully in her sleep at Dorenbecher Children's Hospital. Her parents said that in her final days she had talked constantly about her visit to Neverland and how happy she was that Michael wasn't sad anymore. The impact of Sophie's death rippled far beyond her immediate family. The entire 7th floor of the hospital fell silent for days. Children who had never even spoken to Sophie directly somehow felt the loss of the girl who had brought music and hope to their darkest days. Nurses found themselves crying in supply closets, and even the usually stoic Dr. Anderson struggled to maintain her professional composure. Michael received the news of Sophie's passing while he was in his recording studio, the same room where she had helped him rediscover his musical magic. The call came from Jennifer Miller, who wanted him to hear it directly from the family rather than through intermediaries or the media. "Mr. Jackson," Jennifer's voice was barely a whisper through the phone, "I wanted to thank you again for giving Sophie the most beautiful day of her life. She passed this morning, but she was at peace. She kept saying, 'Michael isn't sad anymore, so I don't need to worry about him.'" Michael broke down completely. For the first time since his childhood, he cried not from sadness or frustration or fear, but from a complex mixture of grief and gratitude that he had never experienced before. Sophie had given him back his purpose, and now she was gone. Michael attended Sophie's funeral in Portland, something he almost never did for anyone outside his immediate family. The small service at St. Michael's Catholic Church was packed beyond capacity, with hundreds of people who had been touched by Sophie's brief but powerful life. Michael spoke briefly about how a 9-year-old girl had taught him that magic wasn't something he created. It was something he channeled, something that belonged to everyone who needed it. Sophie reminded me that our gifts aren't really ours, Michael said, his voice steady but thick with emotion. They're meant to be shared, and when we share them with an open heart, they multiply in ways we never imagined possible. After the service, Michael spent 3 hours at the hospital where Sophie had lived her final months. He visited every room on the 7th floor, spending time with each child, singing quietly, and listening to their stories. The nurses later said it was like watching a man being reborn through service to others. 6 months later, Michael Jackson returned to the studio and recorded what many consider his most emotionally powerful ballad, Sophie's Hope. Unlike his previous hits, this song was raw, unpolished in its honesty, and completely vulnerable. He donated all proceeds from the song to children's cancer research and established the Sophie Miller Foundation for pediatric oncology music therapy programs. The foundation grew rapidly, eventually operating in over 200 hospitals worldwide. Every program followed Sophie's simple philosophy. Music wasn't entertainment for sick children. It was medicine. Studies conducted through the foundation showed that children who participated in regular music therapy sessions responded better to treatment, required less pain medication, and maintained better emotional health throughout their cancer journey. In every interview for the rest of his life, when Michael was asked about his lowest point in his recovery from it, he would tell Sophie's story. He would explain how a dying child had reminded him that sadness and magic could coexist, and that his job wasn't to be happy all the time. It was to create happiness for others, especially when he couldn't find it for himself. The recording studio at Neverland was renamed the Sophie Miller Music Room, and Michael kept her hand-drawn picture on his piano until the day he died. Visitors to the ranch during its final years often remarked that Michael seemed different in that room, more present, more joyful, more connected to his purpose. Years later, when Michael's own children asked him about the most important lesson he had ever learned, he would tell them about Sophie Miller, the 9-year-old girl who taught him that magic isn't about being powerful or famous or even happy. Magic is about using whatever gifts you have to make other people's lives a little brighter, even when your own light feels dim. Especially when your own light feels dim, he would add, smiling at the memory of a brave little girl who reminded the king of pop that sometimes the greatest magic happens when we least expect it.